So, how was your day, you three? Pepper asked when she strolled out of the elevator that evening. The meeting had run a bit late, so they were eating at 8 instead of 7, but that didn't change much. Three heads turned up from the countertop of the island as the businesswoman approached, dropping her coat on the rack, for the weather in these late May days were still quite cold before she made her way towards them and took her seat at an empty stool. "It was amazing!" Shay exclaimed, speaking before either of the two could. She had stars in her eyes as she elaborated. "We spent the whole day in the lab, and I got to meet R2-D2, and I got to help with Friday and Friday. I thought Friday's coding was all done a few years ago," Pepper stated before she could stop herself. She glanced at her fiancé, who shrugged. "I'm trying to make Fry more human. Shay here already made her own AI, Alice, and she was able to get Friday to have sympathy, which is a good start for the emotion upgrades." "You did?" Pepper asked, turning to the teenage girl a few seats down. Shay's cheeks exploded in color at the woman's gaze, but she nodded firmly nonetheless. Pepper smiled lightly. "Impressive. What are we having for dinner?" Peter suddenly questioned as his stomach growled. "I don't know." Pepper tapped her finger against her chin as she thought. "Tony? Shay? Any ideas?" Shay shook her head while the billionaire suggested, "We could order out." "That sounds good," Pepper nodded. "What are we getting?" "Pizza!" Both teenagers cried at the same time. "Pizza?" "Yeah!" Shay exclaimed. "Pizza's awesome!" "Agreed," Peter nodded. "Plus it got a lot of calories." "Alright then, pizza it is." "Friday," Tony called up to the AI that ran the compound.
"Yes, sir?"
"Order some pizza for us."
"What would you like?"
Friday's accented voice responded. Tony glanced around. "What does everyone want?" "Pineapple mushroom," Pepper replied immediately. "Pepperoni for me, Fry," Tony said a moment later. "What about you two?" he asked as he turned towards the teenagers that were deep in thought. "I'll take a pepperoni too," Peter decided after another moment had passed. Finally, all eyes turned to Shay, and barely a beat passed before she said, "I'll just have cheese, please."
"Anything else?"
"Cheese bread," Peter cried. "And cinnamon bread," his friend added.
"Of course. Is that all?"
"Yeah, I think that's good," Tony nodded. "Go ahead and order, Fry."
"Already done, boss. Estimated time for arrival, 45 minutes."
"Okay, that sounds like enough time for me to shower and change," Pepper stated, standing up from her seat and grabbing her briefcase. "I'm going to grab something from the lab," Tony mentioned, getting up as well. "Left my phone there." He turned to the teens. "Just hang out here, I guess. Don't destroy everything." "Got it, Mr. Stark," Peter grinned, throwing him some finger guns. Tony sighed and shook his head before turning and walking to the elevator. "So, you want to play video games?" Peter asked, his eyes meeting the girls beside him once the door had closed behind the genius. "Sure? What does that mean?" "It's just," Shay shrugged. "I guess I've never played any video games before." "What?" Peter's eyes widened as he hopped to his feet. "How can you not have played any video games before?" "I couldn't afford the games themselves, let alone the consoles to play them on." Peter's face fell. "Oh, I'm sorry, Shay. I've just always had Ned, so He sucked in a breath. "Sorry." "It's fine," Shay waved him away. "I know you and your aunt were struggling too. You're at Midtown on scholarship, just like me after all." "You're there on scholarship?" Peter questioned, his eyes widening at the new information. Shay placed a hand on her hip and raised an eyebrow at her friend. "Peter, come on." Right. Sorry." Peter's cheeks reddened even more than they already were. An awkward silence fell over the two, and Shay finally broke it when she spoke. "So, video games?" she asked tentatively. Oh yeah, I've never been able to teach someone how to play before." His eyes widened. "You've never played Mario Kart. Come on, let's go. You have an experience experience." Shay laughed but allowed herself to be dragged off into the living room, the television already glowing with light.
"Pizza's here!"
Tony's voice echoed through their surroundings, repeating the words that Friday had said a few moments ago, with much more enthusiasm than the AI was able to create. "Cool!" Peter pressed a button on his controller in hopes of getting one last boost to push him to first place, but it was to no avail. The race ended with Shay placing first, Peter less than a second behind her. Yes! The girl cried, raising to her feet as she let the controller drop. Peter caught it before it hit the ground. I won! Did you see that, Peter? I won! I can't believe I won! She turned to her friend, a triumphant grin on her face as she jabbed her finger into his chest. I told you I could beat you! I won all the other times. Peter crossed his arms, but laughed at the look on the other teen's face nonetheless. Nice job, though. You picked the game up fast. Come on, you two, Pepper called from the kitchen. The food's getting cold. Yeah, I didn't lug that stuff up here for nothing, Tony added. Tony! Pepper's voice scolded a small sound of a hand against fabric, telling the teenagers as they stood up from the couch that the woman had lightly slapped her fiancé. Pepper! Tony complained, clearly over-exaggerating. Ow! Oh, get over yourself. As Peter and Shay slid into seats next to one another at the actual dining table, Tony settled himself in a chair across from them, next to the woman he loved, and observed them critically. After a moment, he turned to address Shay. So, he started. Yes, Mr. Stark? Shay questioned, prompting him to go on as she passed a box of pepperoni pizza to her friend. Tomorrow is your last day at the compound, Yes, sir, Shay nodded, her brow furrowing as she tried to see where this was going. Well, I don't think Pepper and I are ready to let you go. Shay's hands halted their journey towards the cheese bread box and fell to the table instead. Her eyes were darting around the empty space before her. What does that mean, Mr. Stark? Peter asked for her. I wanted to offer Shay an internship here on Darus. Shay sucked in a breath and fell backwards off of her chair. Whoa, Shay, are you okay? Peter cried, hopping out of his seat to help his friend up. Yeah, She placed a hand to her forehead as she stood up for a moment before sitting down again. An internship, Mr. Stark? Yep, and you should know I don't often take high school interns, so consider yourself lucky. How often do you mean? The teenager questioned. Technically, Pepper interjected before Tony could answer, placing herself into the conversation as she used a fork and knife to cut her slice of pizza into small pieces. Peter is the only high school age intern we have at both the Avengers compound and SI, and that's half just a cover-up for Spider-Manning, so you'd technically be the first. Even if Peter does have an internship legally and ID card and all that. Shay swallowed, her eyes wide as she stared at the table. However, when she looked up to stare at Tony and Pepper, her eyes were full of stars as she responded with a weak, Yes, I would love to intern for you. Tony gave her his trademark Stark smile. Great. First, though, we need to ask you a few questions. Shay rubbed her arm. Go ahead. They were about last night, actually, Pepper said. Last night? The teenage girl rubbed her temples. I'm sorry, I don't really remember whatever I think you're talking about. There was a storm last night. Do you remember that? Peter asked her. Yeah, it was still raining this morning, right? And it seemed pretty bad. A lot of branches were knocked over in the forest. Shay nodded, recalling what she had seen when she first looked out the window after waking up. Peter confirmed, a simple nod of his head. Well, last night the storm was crazy, and I'm guessing the thunder was really loud and the lightning was really bright. But the walls cancel sound during a storm, and the windows darken when they sense extreme light. So it didn't affect me as it should. But it affected you, Tony concluded, locking his eyes on the girl's brown orbs. She shifted in her seat uncomfortably as all the eyes in the room turned to bore into her head. Do you know why that is? No, she responded quickly, though she sounded doubtful in her answer. I have no idea what you're talking about. Shay, Pepper said seriously, turning the teen's attention to her for a moment. When you were screaming from the pain of everything being too loud and too bright, you started to glow purple. This outline around you, when it grew more, it left burn marks on the ground and the wall around it. Shay turned her gaze down to her lap, biting her lip as she responded. I don't know what you're talking about. Shay? The girl in question turned to her friend beside her. His face was scrunched up. Please. Shay's features morphed into one of pain as she seemed to think about what she was going to do. All three of her companions watched her, with bated breath as she sighed and took a deep breath before looking up and beginning to speak. I have powers. The girl took her hands out of her lap and rested them on the table to stare at them, her eyebrows furrowing. I don't really know how they work. Sometimes I think I have them figured out, and then suddenly a new power thing comes around and everything just goes crazy again. She rubbed her ear with her left hand. The very first thing that made me notice something was different about me were my senses. They were crazy. Everything was so much brighter and everything was so much louder. I could hear everything, I could see everything, I could feel everything. School became horrible from all the noise, even though the lighting was manageable. So I invented these devices. Shay pulled out her device from before, the ones that fitted to her ears. What do they do? Tony, ever the inventor, questioned. They send waves into the inside of my ear that interfere with the sound waves that are entering. I can adjust them using these buttons. She pulled out the tattered old earring box and opened it fully, allowing everyone at the table to view the wires and buttons within. So I can block some sound, or only a partial amount. Tony nodded and leaned back in his chair before gesturing for her to go on. Well, I don't really have any control over them that much. I don't know what they are or how they work, she finished. I guess that's it. One of those extreme moments of uncontrollableness is what you experienced yesterday. So your powers are what caused that purple outline of magic, Pepper repeated. Shay nodded in confirmation. Okay. Where did you get your powers from? Tony suddenly asked. The girl looked at him and scrunched up her eyebrows. What do you mean? Like, I got my powers from a radioactive spider bite, Peter exclaimed. And Captain America got his from the super soldier serum. Scarlet Witch got her power from the Mind Stone, Tony added. And Bruce, the Hulk, got his from radiation. So Shay, where did your powers come from? I don't know, Shay shrugged. I was born with them. Well, that tells us nothing, Tony groaned. Sorry, Shay stated, her cheeks reddening. I don't. It's fine, Pepper reassured her with a gentle smile. Do I still get the internship? The teenage girl asked hesitantly, her voice small. Of course, sweetheart. Isn't that right, Tony? Pepper asked, though it sounded more like a demand. Yes, obviously, Tony agreed, waving his fiancée off. She looked satisfied. Oh, thank you, Mr. Stark, Mrs. Potts. Thank you, she exclaimed, hopping up on her seat with a grin on her face and sparkling eyes. Of course, Pepper repeated. I'm never impressed with high schoolers. The only one I've ever been impressed by is Peter. Yet, you managed to impress me today, Shay, the billionaire stated. Shay's face became even brighter than before. I can't just let that go, can I? It has been wonderful meeting you, Shay. Pepper smiled that next afternoon as Happy pulled the car up, ready to take the teenager back home to the city. I can't wait to see you again. I'm already excited for it, Miss Potts, the girl exclaimed. Before Pepper could say a word more, Shay had hopped onto her, wrapping the woman in a tight embrace. Pepper was shocked for a moment before the businesswoman relaxed and returned the gesture. See you soon, Miss Potts. Pepper allowed a smile on her face and waved to the girl lightly as she ducked into the car next to her friend and closed the door behind her. As the car drove away, the woman pressed her phone to her ear. Tony. Yes? The kids left? Yes? No? Oh, Tony! Alright, see you in a few minutes. With one last glance at the retreating vehicle, Pepper turned on her heel and strode back inside. Bye, Peter, Shay cried, grabbing her bags as she waved goodbye to her friend. The door closed just as Peter responded. Bye, Shay. See you at school tomorrow. Shay grinned and watched as the black car drove off, turning the corner and disappearing from view. Releasing a breath, Shay spun and looked at the entrance of her apartment building, adjusting the bag slung over her shoulder. Shay took a step forward to the door, walking inside a few moments later. Shay passed through the lobby and down the hall on the first floor. She waited a moment for the shaky old elevator to come down, stepping inside and waiting as it rocked up the 5th floor. Stepping outside, Shay entered the first door on the left, inserting her key and twisting to unlock the door, and allowing herself inside her home. Alice, voice recognition startup. There was a small whirling sound as Shay reached along the wall to turn on the lights, and she noticed that the cameras and speakers in the corner of the room comes to life with the small lights on the sides as a signal.
Hello, Shay.
Alice spoke after a moment.
How was your weekend?
It was good, thank you. Shay sighed while throwing her bag into the corner. Remind me to put the travel bag away later, okay?
Got it.
The teenager collapsed onto her couch, rubbing her hands absently over one of the tears in the fabric covering that had stuffing pouring out of it. Alice?
Yes, Shay?
Can you turn on that Hamilton animatic Peter and I were watching on Friday?
My Shaw animatic?
Alice asked for confirmation. That's the one.
Here you are, Shay.
The girl turned to her dated television screen that was flickering to life with the animatic from 2 days before. It seemed so long ago that she had watched this. Shay sighed and settled back into her couch. This was calm. This was nice. Aw, come on. I got shot 2 days ago. Peter laughed when the criminal pulled a gun on him. You've never faced me, Spider-Man, the man growled. I'm one of the most skilled with this you're ever gonna see. Sounds cool, man. Show me. Peter laughed again as he swung up, bounced off the alley wall, and sent a kick flying at one of the unarmed guy's chest. He flew backwards and was webbed to the ground a second later, another one of his friends joining him when he was stuck to the wall a moment after. Peter's spidey senses flared, but didn't react in time, getting hit in the back and pushed against the wall very suddenly. The man pushed the gun against the superhero's head. Whoa, man, relax. Peter tried to calm the man despite the fact that his heart was pounding out of his chest. No, you've been nothing but a bother since you showed up, the man snarled. Now I can get you out of the way once and for all. Peter closed his eyes and waited, his heart skipping a beat as he heard a gun go off. Shay sat on her couch a moment, and the next, there was a blue light and she found herself at the entrance of an alley. Suddenly on her feet, the girl moved against the stone brick wall and peered into the alleyway, for once thanking her inhuman eyesight as she could see what was going on. She saw Peter as Spider-Man, fighting a group of maybe 5 guys. One was webbed up already, and his friends were quickly following. All the while, Peter danced around the aim of one man, maybe the leader, who had a gun. Shay was ready to move away and find her way home to leave Peter to finish these guys as he did with them all, when she felt her heart stop, because the man had caught her friend by surprise and was holding him against the wall with a gun to his head. She didn't think. She just ran. She just ran. She ran, and she made it. Shay threw herself at Peter, tackling him and throwing his body out of the way. He fell to the ground in a daze, but unscathed. Shay? Peter asked as he stood up, his mask showing his confusion. The girl could only suck in a breath, her hand clutching the blooming spot of red on her shirt. Shay! Peter ran forward, webbing up the confused guy as he went before gripping his friend and webbing himself up to the roof of the building on their right. Oh my god! Peter gasped when he let her body go, her head leaning upon a small stone. Shay, you're shot! Shay looked down at her shirt, where a bright, wet red spot was growing bigger and bigger. Really? She gasped. I didn't notice. Karen, let Mr. Stark know what's going on, Peter demanded. Scan the wound and tell him in the message how long she has.
The scanner.
The voice of his AI said softly. No, Peter cried. No, you're lying, Peter? The teenage superhero turned down to look at his friend as she bled out on the roof. She wasn't looking at him. Her eyes instead turned to the sky. Talk to me, please. Peter swallowed the lump in his throat as best as he could, tears streaming down his cheeks, but he nodded. Of course. He moved to lay down next to his dying friend and used his hand as a pillow. He looked up to the sky as well. The sky is beautiful, huh? Yes, Shay replied, her voice weak as she spoke. Peter held back a sob at her tone. I've always loved the night. So many stars, you know? And we can barely see them from here in the city normally. My eyesight let me, though. There are... She gulped and sucked in a breath. So many stars. She paused before adding, I've always thought it would be amazing to go to space. To see the stars. You will, Peter said as firmly as he could. And even then, his voice wavered. You're about to go join the stars, Shay. He looked to her, his vision blinded for a moment by the tears leaking from his eyes. Her brown orbs were beginning to glaze over. That sounds nice, she said softly. She turned ever so slightly in his direction. Tell me about them, Peter. Of course, he agreed. Peter looked up at the stars and began to speak. Stars are large balls of gas and energy, scientifically, but they are so much more than that. They are light, and they are happiness. They make people dream. They are inspiring, and they are beautiful. Keep going, Shay stated, her voice not even at a whisper. I love the stars. Stars are... Peter paused for a moment to stop a choking sound from escaping. Stars are incredible miracles, and they are magnificent balls of light that change the lives of those that they touch. Peter realizing now that he wasn't talking about the stars in the sky anymore. He sat up and pulled his knees to his chest. You're a star, Shay. He turned to the subject of his statement and felt his blood run cold. For all he saw was a body. Shay's brown eyes, normally so bright and full of light, were nothing more than glassy orbs now, gazing up empty, unseeing into the stars above. Peter looked at the girl he considered one of his best friends, the girl he had met just a few days ago, the girl who had sacrificed her life for his. And suddenly, all the emotions caught up with him. Peter screamed and sobbed and screamed and sobbed. He shakily closed her eyes forever and clutched her body to him. He unconsciously begged his friend to come back, to open her eyes, make a joke, embarrass herself. Something, but nothing. For Shay Lane was gone. She was among the stars.
No! You can't do this to me! You killed her! She's gone! That was so hard to record. My voice kept getting shaky and sad. I didn't think I was this close to the character until she died. Oh my god. I can't. I hope you enjoyed the fan fiction. There is another one, so stay tuned for that one. Happy Easter, guys. Like, what the heck? This might be the only video I post this week. I'm not sure. Things are a little hectic. I'm sorry. Oh my god, we died. We died. Oh man, this is horrible. This is not what I wanted. Oh man. Rest in peace, everyone.